But first, one of the things that always strikes me over a lifetime of studying, living, and breathing all things American is how the Democrats, the party of the left, the party which likes to think of itself as the party of sensible shoe, earnest good government, always winds up looking, when given half a chance, like a pack of seditionists, insurrectionists, and just plain kooks.
Do you see this craft piece of paper? Do you know how all of these holes were created? By me. I put all the holes in this.
Some very rich old white men are exerting their power to suppress our own people, thus creating a feeling of civil war in the streets.
Do not compare ICE or Border Patrol agents to the Nazis. That's an unfair comparison. The Nazis were willing to show their faces.
We have got children in Minnesota hiding in their houses, afraid to go outside. Many of us grew up reading that story of Anne Frank. Somebody's going to write that children's story about Minnesota.
Yes, everyone from TikTok loons to the governor of Minnesota, who could, in a parallel universe, have wound up as America's vice president right now, are on a tear, whipping up hysteria and fear because, let's see, what is it this time? Oh, yeah. The Trump administration went to Minnesota to arrest a bunch of Somali welfare fraudsters. Sorry, alleged Somali welfare fraudsters. I mean, honestly, it's all so tiresome and so predictable. Yet, as we are going to speak about throughout the program this evening, it's also incredibly dangerous. Because what we have seen this week is the Democrat-run government in an American state, in this case Minnesota, running up to the absolute cliff edge of full-blown disaster with Washington, and then swerving at the very last second to avert a crisis. Now, recall how things have gone over the past few weeks. Remember, there was the whole crisis in Minnesota that started with revelations of potentially billions of dollars in fraud, fake daycare centers, and Medicare providers and the like, emanating from the state's Somali community. Then there was the response from the Trump administration, a massive surge of ICE agents and federal law enforcement, which led to wild and incredibly well-organized actions by left-wing activist groups tracking and harassing federal law enforcement, even laying siege to the hotels where they were staying, going well beyond the bounds of peaceful protest, well beyond what the First Amendment allows, well beyond anything that we might consider free speech. No. These actions, of course, then resulted in tragedy with two demonstrators being killed, Renee Good and Alex Pretty, in circumstances that can only be described as fraught. And after secret encrypted chats were revealed, these groups behind these demonstrations appear to have close links to the Democrat government in Minnesota itself. But then a funny thing happened. Tim Walz had a phone call with President Trump. And for whatever reason, maybe he just realized how much legal pain he and his people could be in, he decided to send in, finally, his own Minnesota police, who had previously been hanging back and letting the activists run riot, sending them in to clear up the mess, including that protest that was laying siege to the hotel where ICE was staying.
You are now under arrest. Please sit down and wait for instruction.
Woo, you love to see it. Here's Donald Trump, though, talking about that call with Tim Walz.
This man has suggested that this is a modern-day Gettysburg. He has likened his situation to Anne Frank in the Holocaust. He has said that ICE is your Gestapo army. And then you guys speak on the phone. I'm fascinated by that conversation.
It couldn't have been a nicer conversation. And in fact, I said to my people, I said, it's hard to believe that's the same guy I watch on television, or I watch in a debate not doing so well, or because we had a very reasonable conversation, very good conversation. If you believe the conversation, he'd like to get this thing over with.
In other words, Walz backed down. He blinked, but not, of course, before two people who did not need to die were killed in circumstances that will ultimately be determined by investigators, and not before doing a good deal to shred the principles of federalism, that is, that Washington's rules prevail on things like immigration. States can't have their own policy on this. It's very simple, folks. And, of course, he did this also not before upping the normalization of violence. And I'm sorry, friends, this is all going to get worse before it gets better, because we have already seen how violence on the left goes. It leads to murder and attempted murder. Charlie Kirk, the attempts on Donald Trump's life. And I am afraid, for the moment, it is only going to get worse. Because as I showed you at the top of this piece, this Hitler rhetoric, it's now a mainstream thing. It is normalized. The leftists, they've got nowhere to go. So the logic is plain, as terrifying as it is. If Trump is literally Hitler, if ICE agents are the Gestapo, well, how could you not resist, to use their word? How could you not fight back? How could you not do whatever is necessary to stop that evil, or what you perceive as an evil, even if it is just the enforcement of federal law voted for by Democrats, the democracy process in America? Now, there will be leftists who want to move on more to direct violent action, and plenty of social media people, as I showed earlier on, they're supporting this. They're cheering it on, because what happens now is whoever goes the most violent, well, they can achieve hero status. Just think of how they lionized Luigi Mangione for allegedly gunning down a healthcare executive in New York a couple of years ago. Now, there is some good news in all of this. While there is the radicalism on the left that's only going to get worse, the polls are showing that most Americans are rejecting this lunacy. But as in the 1960s and 1970s, I fear that America is headed into a period of political violence, and this normalization is being driven from the left, the supposedly peaceful, tolerant left. Violence directed at voters, violence directed at the system, violence directed at politicians, with a message saying that if you get rid of Trump, and this is exactly what they did in 2020, we'll calm things down and you can go back to normal. Now, back in the 60s and 70s, Richard Nixon was president, and they hated him for the way he took it right up to the left, which it thought it should be running the show. And you remember what they did to Nixon, which is why it is so predictable that they are doing the same thing to Trump, or trying to, by any means necessary.